Thank you, Sarah and Neha. Raffi, I'm going to move you over more towards the middle since you're our guest of honor. Unfortunately, I'm going to put you under me, though. Yeah, okay, good. You're not, okay. I'm very excited to have this conversation. I'm not going to spend a ton of time introducing Raffi because you have his bio, and I really want to jump into conversation because it's such a treat to have you here today. So I just want to frame a little bit. We've been talking a lot for a while now about the role of AI in global health. And we're really lucky because Raffi not only has this incredible background in computer science, technology, innovation, the social sector, funding. And let me just jump into there in that sense. So Raffi, you do have us, and also the National Democratic Committee, by the way. You've just done a million interesting things.
That's either a good or bad thing.
Well, anyway, I think there's a lot we can learn from your very cool and very diverse career. And he's also chair of MEDIC, which is one of our member organizations since 2023. And so maybe just why don't you kick us off and tell us a little bit about your interest in global health? I know you used to work at Emerson as well. Talk a little bit about that and your incredible background and how that relates to global health.
Really, I think the first time I sort of came into contact with global health question. So most of my career is generally about following my wife around. She is
not a bad thing.
She is an amazing woman. She's a Stanford professor. She's way smarter than I am. I'm just a person who used to write essays and podcasts. And so in 2009, she worked at the WHO in Colin Mather's group to work on the 2009 Global Health Risks Report.
Now you're on. Okay, keep going.
Okay.
Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so she was working at WHO on the Global Health Risk Report. She's a computer scientist. She's a mathematician, and she did a lot of work in order to do accurate predictions for that report. And what it turned out that they ended up doing was not going with the most accurate models that she designed, but instead going with the ones that were easier to understand. And that actually stuck in my head for the longest time. Yeah. It was just you were in that case, the ability to understand it trumped accuracy in a bunch of different ways. And I feel like that's been a thread that's been playing out over and over and over again. But that was maybe my first time sort of experiencing both global health and what the interesting technical trade-offs might be around that. And then, I've been really fortunate. Around, a couple of years ago, I joined Emerson Collective as its CTO. I got to meet some amazing grantees. I got to meet some people in this room. I met Josh Nesbitt. I met Cassia Vanderhoef Holstein. And so through that work, I got really interested in how technology can actually make a change on the ground, but in very specific ways. How can you actually do it in phrase human-centered ways, or how can you do it sort of empowering people as opposed to dictating people? And so I feel like those two threads have been converging my entire career, and just being able to do it at the scale of MEDIC and being able to work on those problems is just an honor, frankly. So that's basically how I end up in the space.
Awesome. Okay, well, we'll return to some of those threads in a little bit. So for those of you who aren't familiar, Raffi's done some really great writing, both recently in the New York Times and the Atlantic. And I'm going to ask you to tell the story that you talked about in the Atlantic around an accident he had with his Tesla, because I think it really frames some of our conversation around AI. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. Can I ask how many of you own a Tesla or drive a Tesla every day?
You can admit it. You're in a safe zone. You're in a safe zone. You're in a safe zone here. Good intentions.
It is a wonderful physical car. I have no so I wrote this story in the Atlantic a few months ago where around November of last year, I was driving my son to a Boy Scouts meeting. We were cruising through the streets of Palo Alto. I actually had autopilot on at the time. Now, in my defense, one of the fortunate things I was able to do earlier in my career is I ran Uber's self-driving car team. So I ran it in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Pittsburgh is actually an insanely hard place to drive. If any of you have been there, it's incredibly hilly.
We see some nods of agreement in the audience.
The weather truly sucks. My wife made me sell my stick shift car when we moved to Pittsburgh because she was like, I'm not driving this in Pittsburgh. We had to get a new car. And so I think I know a lot about self-driving cars. So I've trained lots of people to drive self-driving cars and how to react in bad situations, understand what they know, what they don't know. We were driving in full self-driving mode in the Tesla on the way to my son's Boy Scouts meeting. For those of you who know Palo Alto, we were taking a turn from onto Alma Street underneath one of the underpasses. It's a tricky turn. The lanes aren't really marked well. Lots of people decelerate super quickly to make that turn because it's a little confusing as what to do. The autopilot at that moment turned its wheel to make the turn, then jerked back, then jerked another time, and then we slammed into the wall at about 40 miles an hour. My sons were thankfully absolutely fine. I was knocked unconscious for a second. When I came to, my youngest son was standing outside the car, just like generally confused what was going on. My eldest son was finding my glasses because they were thrown from my face when the airbag hit me. And so like that, as a software engineer, as a person who works in AI, as a person who thinks about autonomy, for me, just really drove home, maybe pun intended, the way that this technology is being rolled out into the world, we really need to start asking some real questions about it. So maybe two ways to think about this Tesla accident from my point of view. One is the blame is on me as the driver. Like my insurance, like it was my name on the police report. It's my name on the insurance. Like the insurance effectively is written as I lost control of the car, which I suppose is technically true in that moment. But, and maybe I could have reacted faster. I mean, it takes, when you're sort of lulled into the safety of self-driving, it takes a while to context switch back into active driving. And, I've requested the videos of the crash. I've watched them multiple times. This all plays out in the order of 4 seconds, which is not quite enough time for someone to come to, like basically maybe I should have been paying attention more, but come to realize what's going on and take over. It wasn't possible, at least for me in that moment. So in some ways, like this technology has been hoisted upon all of us and responsibility is thrown on us. And the phrase that I like to use and other people use in that zone is like, I'm the moral crumple zone for the car of just like this system wasn't able to decide what to do. So at the last minute, I just threw it to the human with the hopes that the human can figure out what to do with it. So that seems crazy. And then the second is just mostly that we're being used as training mechanisms for these systems to be deployed in the world. So in some ways, like I'm again taking the risk. I'm actually paying for a product which was not cheap at the time in order for me to be training data and then for me to take responsibility to win that road. So I think a lot about this like moral crumple zone when it comes to autonomous machines generally, of just like, where does responsibility lie when all these systems are being deployed? When we start using them and they start making critical decisions, like who's going to make the ultimate call? You don't sue Tesla in that situation. Some people have tried and it's won in some cases, but this is going to play out over and over and over again in our world. And that question of responsibility, I think, is the biggest one.
I think there's so many interesting points you're raising. And one of the things you also talk about is these machines and these algorithms that are intending to build confidence, right? And build authority. And think about this in global health, right? Like we talk about like user-centered design, like building trust with different stakeholders. And you talk about that the AI, it's like it wants you to trust it.
100%.
But at the same time, like if something goes wrong,
I mean, you're sort of lulled into this notion of trust and complacency. Like I have a line in the piece, which is like, at some point, there's one thing which is driving a self-driving car and you get lulled into thinking that it's safe. And generally it's very safe on highways. Local roads are really,
remember this,
are really
everybody.
hard problem. Like I mean, we have the exact same problem in Uber. Highways are actually a quite easy thing. Like even though you're moving faster, things happen slower. But the local roads are actually very hard. But that lulled into complacency at some point, like, for me, it's a car, for you, it's a chatbot, right? Like in some ways, like where does your thinking stop and where does the chatbot thinking start is becoming a very interesting, blurry question that we all really need to be asking ourselves, especially in this world. And I think about this, you go back to my wife's example, like not going with the most accurate model, but instead going with the most legible model. The bad version of that outcome is go with the model that sounds the most confident. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be right. It just sounded the most confident at the time. And that's exactly what these AI systems are programmed to do. Right now, they're like, I have another piece in Atlantic I call the validation machines. And what their entire job to do is to try to get you engaged with them. So they need to sound confident because the instant they don't sound confident, you'll stop using them. That breaks the business model that they're all operating under. So that sounding confident, that lullness into like just giving over agency, giving over thought to this Well, I mean, look, we as humans have the ability to anthropomorphize rocks, right? Like we all have pet rocks at some point. So like this is a pet rock. It just happens to talk to you. So like it's a very confusing thing for the human brain to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, I think many of us, when thinking about this example, it's hard not to think about community health workers. And when I think back too about the history of user-centered design too, like centering the community health worker in the design, and it does feel like we're almost stepping back with AI. And a lot of the design is happening here, and I'm very cognizant we're here in the Bay Area. The design is happening here, and we're getting further disconnected.
Yeah, I get this question all the time of just like, what's Medic's AI strategy?
Why don't you tell us?
I mean, but a lot of people assume the goal is to remove community health workers from the loop.
Especially if you're wanting to build trust, it's like this tension again, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like you can make the argument that these systems know more, but like knowing more doesn't necessarily mean knowing better, like in a bunch of different ways. So like for us, I mean, happy to talk about what we are landing on as our strategy, but like removing community health workers is not even in the conversation right now. Like, there's like classical tension when it comes to AI systems. Like, Stanford in the 70s, there was one lab that was working on automation of basically removing humans from the loop. And there was another lab working on augmentation, like giving humans superpowers. And I'm much more in that camp. So like maybe in a nutshell, the AI strategy for us is like, how do we superpower these community health workers? Like they already are the ones who are giving their time, their love, their energy, their care to the world. We don't want to remove it. I want to give them more time to do more of that in some way. So like we need to figure out ways to make that happen using these technologies. And so like I think a lot of the conversations that we should be having as a community is like how to make that world happen, because going into that world is actually maybe against what the big platform providers want to do with their technologies. And look, I used to work at big platforms that part of my career. I understand exactly where they're coming from. They're not necessarily doing it for evil reasons. It's just the incentive structure is kind of messed up. And so like trying to figure out how we as a community can create different incentives so that this technology can be deployed in a way that we can amplify love and care would be really interesting.
I want to push a little bit on that too, because you actually kind of framed where I wanted to go, which is what do you suggest to those of us in the room who are building tools? Like how do we center while building trust, center our users, center our stakeholders? Could you maybe give an example or two?
I mean, I can tell you what we're trying to do at Medic, but maybe I'll overall phrase it for a second of just like the power actually rests in this room and rests in our organizations. Like, when I think about, I used to say this to grantees at Emerson all the time of like, well, Anthropic wants to make a deal with us or OpenAI wants to make a deal with us. It doesn't actually matter which company, any company that wants to make a deal with us. My response is just like, well, you have more power in that conversation than you think you do. Like for them, they want validation, they want proof points in the world, they want all these things, and you're the gatekeeper in some way. So you should be dictating the terms, not the other way around. So maybe I'll set that as like an overall frame.
I think this is a good reminder. I just want to interject because I do think, particularly in this world we're living in right now with funding, there's a bit of a scarcity mentality in global health. So when a big partner comes to us and wants to work with us, I think there isn't the sense that we can negotiate more. But so
you absolutely can.
Okay.
What are
our takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely can. I think you can absolutely set the terms. I mean, like, sure, you can't
and you should set the terms.
You should absolutely set the terms. Like, obviously, be smart about it. Don't create an impossible situation. But like, they need you more than you. Maybe not more than you need them, but they need you a lot in this equation. And so, like, maybe what I say. When we think about developing tools is to go back to that human-centeredness in a lot of ways. Like human-centeredness is not for me about like eliminating and making things frictionless and making things invisible behind the scenes.
We're going to come to that too.
It's a lot about like, how do we make understanding legible? How do we make understanding simple so that like, I talk a lot about like this entire ecosystem we've created, at least in Silicon Valley, is one based around frictionless design. Like make it really easy for you to buy something on Amazon. Make it really easy. Like, if I could just have an Apple subscription plan and then a new device showed up, I would totally do it because like it was the easiest thing to go do. But there is benefit to friction. Like there is benefit to actually like having a stumbling point. Like I think about this a lot when it comes to, I'll go to another sector for a second. I think about this a lot when it comes to our kids. Like I don't want their life to be easy.
Right.
Like there is
Yeah.
something to be said about productive struggle when you're in the middle of education. And so productive struggle is actually where the interesting thoughts in my mind, creativity comes out. So again, like my goal isn't to be like a community health worker, one push button and then everything just happens. It's making it really easy for them to understand what's going to happen when they push that button so that they can be part of that conversation of like, is that button the right thing I should be pushing right now? And how do we learn from the person actually going to do that? So I think it's a lot about thinking about how do we like selectively have the right points of friction through the system. That's what human-centered design means for me.
I love that. Thank you for the shout out to human-centered design. I think I want to pick up on your thread too around incentive and friction, because one of the things many of you know with the Bay Area Global Health Alliance is we've done some real focus on partnerships, and I know we're going to talk more about that today. But it's already challenging to align incentives, right? Like we may have a lot of folks in the room who will control AI and products and algorithms, and we have our partners that we're serving, the ministries of health, community health workers, patients ultimately, and it's already friction. So I think I would love to hear from you what your recommendations are too, because I think there is this tendency with AI to remove that, and this is a good example of where like we cannot not just for creativity, removing or reducing creativity, shall we say, but also reducing the very real hard conversations we need to have with partners.
I like to think about a little bit of how do we change the game in our to be in our favor.
Say more about that. Yeah.
So like what we think about at Medic a lot is like how do we focus on open source, how do we focus on community, and how do we focus on local ownership? So like if we look through like those three lenses, like open source does a lot for us. Like open source is a great conversation to be had during the procurement strategy because like generally it's cheaper, generally. I mean, maybe when you do the TCO, it comes out to be just slightly
TCO
cheaper.
means?
Sorry, total cost of ownership.
Thank you.
It might be slightly cheaper, but generally it still ends up being cheaper. And it has the benefit that like I actually have control. And so like the way that we talk about it, at least to ministries, is that like this can actually be tuned to exactly what we need in this location. Like local ownership for me is sort of like paramount here. It's not about form fitting what the local people need to do to a workflow that was designed 6,000 miles away. It's about tuning the technology. It's about tuning the technology to the local workflow instead. So we think a lot about that. And then we think about that local ownership. So like one of the things that we're doing at Medic is we're actually spinning off a whole organization that we're calling Medic Afia, which is meant to house all the local work we're doing in Kenya and Uganda, for example. And if that model works, we're going to spin off more of them in the other locations that we're working with. Instead of housing them in one global organization, which we've been doing for the past couple of years, like actually have a whole network of medics that are all in the local areas, because then they can tune better. They can like actually have people on the ground. We can hire people who are in that area. We can fundraise in that area. So I think that we want to just really change the game about like what that technology deployment and community really looks like. We can invest in local engineers actually building these technologies again, instead of having people 7,000 miles away going and doing it. So we really think that sort of like that lean in how technology should be developed and deployed is sort of like our wedge into that conversation.
That's very cool. And then it sounds like the different, I'm going to say chapters, that's not right. Okay. But then they can work to learn from each other 100%.
As well. And so like we want to enable more people on the ground that are within hundreds of miles and thousands of miles, that kind of thing. And then of course we'll just have a bigger community of medic aligned people that are working in all the different problem areas, sharing different technologies, sharing different things across them. So one of the models we stole this from is, back in my grad school days, I worked with a professor called Neil Gershenfeld back at the MIT Media Lab. And what we did is we created a network of fab labs across the world. So we deployed $20,000 fabrication laboratories, and like they were super simple in the grand scheme of things. There were like a laser cutter, there were a 3D printer, there were a milling machine, a bunch of different tools, and we just deployed them into different areas of the world without really knowing what people would go do, but then they brought their own problems and tried to fix it using these tools that were available to them. So like people in Western Africa were experimenting with Maxwell's demons to try to do refrigeration using compressed air. People in Lapland in Norway were building RFID tags for their reindeer so they can better understand where their flock was going. And like these communities would then get together once a year online to just share what they've built. All their things were open source. There's a wiki page with everyone's like code or everyone's like PCB board that they've built and things like that. So that one's a little bit high level because you got to learn something about machining in order to participate there. But I want to live in the same world when it comes to open source and when it comes to global health. Of just like I firmly believe that the needs of Uganda and the needs of Kenya are similar but not the same. And so like I want them to be able to own it slightly differently, but like you said, when we find something common, we should extract it and then we should share it. That's what like Meta Global's job will be. Is just like not necessarily even doing rapid speed software design like we used to, but instead of holding the values of what that network should be doing and then moving technology around to try to find the right place for the right thing.
I also love that too, because I think many of us in the room, maybe it's our Silicon Valley ethos, we really love to hear about quote failures, our lessons learned, as we like to say in global health, because we don't have the incentives. But I also hope that too, the network will be able to share their learnings across it too, not just like what works.
No, I mean, I think a lot of it is just like, hey, we tried this and like, don't anyone try that. Like,
this is why it doesn't work.
Yeah. I think sharing negative examples. I mean, I think about this in AI all the time.
Yeah.
Like we only share positive training examples. We actually have to share negative training examples in order to make the system resilient.
That's awesome. I want to turn to security, AI and security. So one of the pieces that Raffi wrote about recently too was Anthropic. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to let you tell the story, but around the security breach. Yes, thank you. And then the $100 million credit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so
back up and why don't you explain it as compared to my bullet point?
I mean, so Firefox is very fortunate. So for those of you who don't know, Firefox is one of the world's largest web browsers, not the world's largest, but it's a fully open browser. The existence of Firefox is the reason why the web is open today. Like Firefox was created in the 90s as a way to counter the Microsoft monopoly or the attempt of Microsoft to take over the web. So because Firefox exists and only a couple 100 million people use it, it's enough to force the web to be open. So it's a nice place to be because it means a lot of partners want to work with the Firefox team. So Anthropic approached us, let's call it January of this year, to run Firefox under Opus 4.6. It was one of their most advanced models at the time to try to find bugs in Firefox. And it found, let's call it on the order of 10 fairly critical bugs. This code base is 15 years old, and this new model was able to find about 10 bugs that no one has seen before. So the Firefox team rapidly closed them, and they were very grateful. That was amazing. A few months later, Anthropic reapproached us with, before we all knew it, a model that they were calling Mythos, and they asked if they could run it again on the Firefox code base, and it found 200 bugs. Again, literally bugs we've never seen before, but it was able to find 10x more bugs than the last time it found them. And we rapidly tried to close every single one of them. But that really got me to thinking all of a sudden of like, are we just all screwed at this point? Because like if these tools are now finding exploits in the world or could find exploits in the world, our entire digital infrastructure is basically built on the back of volunteers. Like, you know, if you think about the global health scenario and like it's built on like a lot, the healthcare system of Kenya is literally built on a nonprofit in the US that I happen to be the chair of, which is kind of nuts. The entire internet is also done in the same way, like DNS, which is what the service that you use when you type google.com, it resolves it to an IP address. It's philanthropically funded and run by 3 guys. Like that's effectively all the people in the world that write that code. OpenSSL, which is when you go to HTTPS as opposed to HTTP. A few years ago, like a critical bug was found in OpenSSL, and it was one person. Like every company in the world was scrambling, and it was literally only one person who needed to go and had to wake him up. He had to go fix the bug, and then every company
Not allowed to sleep.
every company in the world then had to deploy his code. Like critical infrastructure is being run this way, and now we have models that are able to find these vulnerabilities. So imagine what vulnerabilities are in our power grid, or imagine what vulnerabilities are in our phone system. And so what Anthropic did at that moment, which is understandable, but in my opinion, wrong, is that they created a coalition of, let's call it 12 companies, 15 companies, and gave them access to Mythos so that they could start securing their systems. Think people like Cisco are on the list to build networking switches. But that person who writes OpenSSL, that person who writes DNS, the person who writes curl, which is a piece of code that fetches stuff from the internet, every PlayStation in the world runs curl. Those people weren't given access. So we're in this crazy arbitrage moment where basically one company is dictating to the rest of the world who can be secure and who can't be secure. And so one of the things I was calling for in this New York Times piece is we need to actually understand who does critical infrastructure in this world. It's volunteers that are who are the essential workers in a lot of ways, and we need to treat them like the essential workers they are. And so people like Anthropic should be banding together the entire industry to be funding these essential workers who are holding up our entire digital lives. And so for me, Anthropic just got to do better in this case. And the more nuanced problem here is that the open models are closing the gap. So you can download a model from China right now, which is technically open weights, is what they call it, that I think in 6 months we'll be able to find these bugs too. So we're arguing about who should get access when in reality the entire world is going to have access in 6 months, and we just need to move faster on the understanding how to who should be critical workers and how do they get access to these type of things.
Okay, I'm going to ask you an operational question,
Go.
then maybe theoretical. I think there's many in the room who are already using some of the AI, the DHIS2 and the Open MRS. Do you have suggestions operationally to prepare, or what should organizations be doing now to protect against this asymmetry, I guess?
Yeah, well, I mean, in those situations, I think there's a lot of questions that need to happen to the Open MRS team and stuff like that. I know they're on it. I know they're working well, but they need help in the grand scheme of things. And so when we all are talking to the big companies who want to use us as deployment mechanisms, we should be flexing part of that power to be how are you helping OpenMRS out right now? Can you give them access to Mythos? Can you give them access to some of your engineers to help them fix some of the critical bugs that might be found? We as a community could be using that as a point of leverage to make sure that our critical infrastructure is in the right place. I think that we also need to do a little bit of more education amongst ourselves on what it really means to be deploying these systems in the wild, and how what vulnerabilities those give up, because we usually focus on the opportunities, we focus on the socio negative effects, not the operational negative effects, and there are going to be a lot of them. And so a better understanding that is something that we all need to go do too.
Well, and I wonder if that's something that is a collective voice for the Alliance and for some of the other groups that are out there. And I'll just mention too, Open MRS is Open Medical Record Systems, and DHIS is District Health Information Software. And so looking at population and then also looking at medical records. And maybe we could also turn to open source too, because that's something that our community has some experience with. I would even say dating even back to hardware and some of the challenges with that. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that too, and particularly your recommendations, if there's one guy or three guys that are holding this really important framework up, how do we make it more robust? How do we make it more sustainable in the future?
I mean, I am loath to ask us to all give a little bit of cash to those guys. I know we're in
especially in a community that's already short cash.
We're already in a cash-strapped environment, but that's fundamentally what they need. Is they also need money, they also need resources, they also need people. Curl is an interesting example, that piece of code that fetches things from the internet, because it's been mostly stable and no one's really worried about it until something like this showed up. So we also need to figure out what's the right insurance plan for these guys, because if that one person disappeared, how do we have a succession plan on this critical infrastructure? But I think one thing I would do if I were in all your positions, given this technological change we're under, is do a true audit of like, what are the systems you really depend upon? Like, if they're not given to you by a vendor that you have a contract with for maintenance, et cetera, because you're relying on open source, better know that than not. So really understand like, where are those critical infrastructure points? Who are the people behind them? I'm very happy to help you find those people. That's, for me, that's the easy part. But like, who are those people and how do we feel that they are resourced or not? And I would also encourage you at that moment not to be like, we're not going to rely on them because they're so under-resourced. I think that's, again, the exact wrong response. I think what we should figure out instead is like, how we're going to give them more resources. How are we going to make sure that they are resilient, and the way that we use them as resilient is really the question.
Yeah, and I'm just going to repeat back a line you wrote that I was really struck by, which I think speaks to this. Like, if we don't do this, you wrote, when we ask AI a question, you're getting information that's produced at the intersection of someone else's values and someone else's incentives. And so this really, to me, especially in global health, really speaks to the need of needing to invest in these types of models and protect it for all of us. I would love to return a little bit back to Medic too, like what prompted the strategy change? And then, I don't know, any early lessons learned? And also just recognizing too that Medic has had some strategic changes over the last several years.
Yeah, actually, before I do that, I want to touch upon that values question. Maybe a way to
go ahead.
Maybe a way to frame it for you all is, I think we have all underestimated what those 10 blue links on Google actually do. Like, I think that like in some ways, like my mom has no idea how PageRank works, like literally has no idea. PageRank is how those links, like which are those links that show up and what order they show up when you go to google.com. But she does know that like, oh, the top link means something, the bottom link means something, and there are some dissenting opinions sort of in this list. And if we're going to this world of like, again, like systems that sound confident and they just give you one answer, you have to really ask yourself, like, where did that one answer come from? So like the maybe like two examples I like to think about here. There was just a paper joint between Princeton and UW, where they asked a bunch of these platform AI systems about some purchasing decision they wanted to make. And then they measured what the response was back from that. And then they changed the persona who was asking it. And what they found is that more often than not, the systems seem to be favoring sponsored results as opposed to what might actually be the thing you're looking for. And on top of that, these systems are also subtly profiling you. So if you're of higher socioeconomic status, they're giving you a different answer than if you're lower socioeconomic status. And so the question that like you would have never known that unless you're a highly suspicious person like I am, but like you have just never understood that's actually going on. Maybe another way to look at that is there was a paper last year, actually one of my favorite papers from last year, maybe more apropos to this community, is kidney donations. Kidney donations is a very complicated thing. It's not simply the order which people show up in line. There's a values judgment you're making in kidney donations. So a bunch of researchers, I want to say in Maryland, asked a whole bunch of the platforms, how would you donate this? Like, who would you allocate this kidney to? All the Western AIs, so Meta, Google, Anthropic, ChatGPT, answered one way. All the Eastern open source AIs answered a different way. And so like that was pretty stark of just like something in the training, something in the water is in those systems, not exactly evident, but they're making decisions in very different ways. And so like we all just need to be understood, like if we're using someone else's system, their incentive, their training data, whatever their worldview is encoded somewhere in that system. Like these systems are just really good at picking up the worldview of their creators. And so when I think about ownership in this space, like, and I acknowledge that this is a hard thing for us to do, but like we have to think about like how do we own every layer of this, or how do we influence every layer of this? How do we make sure our imprint is on every single layer of the systems that we're using? Because otherwise they might be doing things that don't align with what we're saying. So sorry, I forgot the actual question you asked.
No. That was a great diversion. Thank you. No, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about how some of these lessons are coming into Medic's strategy and just even some of the changes you've had over the last years.
I mean, so for Medic, we think a lot about this augmentation versus automation debate. Like, unsurprisingly, we get funders all the time who are just like, well, are you going to get rid of CHWs? Or like, How do you vibe code the latest interface that someone might want to show up in the world? We get those questions every single day. And our answer is generally like, interesting, but not.
Can I stop you for 1 second? I want to make sure everybody knows what vibe code is here, actually.
So
Thank you.
Vibe coding, for those of you who don't know, is like, actually my son vibe codes is kind of hilarious.
I'm about to take a class in vibe coding.
If you're all curious about my 10-year-old son, cute and stinky dot productions, like he's been vibe coding a whole series of video games. And what it just really means is he sits down with an AI, describes the video game he wants, and then the AI builds the video game, and they'll be like, oh no, I wanted the dinosaur to be purple, and then it makes another version of it where the dinosaur's purple. And so vibe coding in some ways for my son is this creative expression, but for the rest of the industry is becoming the way that we write code. Like, I think of myself as a pretty good engineer. I don't think I've written a line of code since November at this point, which in my industry is forever, effectively, because I just describe the code I want to one of these chat systems, and it writes the code for me. And then I read it, I make sure it's kind of okay, and then we just go from there. So we're getting funders all the time who are asking us like, well, why do you have engineers anymore? Like, why don't you just like get rid of all your engineers and just let the CHWs vibe code it directly for themselves, kind of thing, which, interesting. But to my point earlier of like, I think our job is to scale care, and is to scale like the love that people feel for their fellow human being. So what we've done instead is we've chose to lean into augmenting our team. So like we've gotten Claude licenses for the engineers on the Medic team, and they can just generate code faster. And so like we're not getting rid of them, we're just doing more with the resources that we have. Like pull reviews or pull requests from all the other community members. Like when someone else writes code and they want in the Medic code base, we can scan it a lot faster. We can integrate it a lot faster. We can deploy versions a lot faster. We can find bugs in production faster. Like we're not going to automate away our people, but we're going to instead figure out how to give us the time to really think about what human-centered means, as opposed to just like making us automatons in that system. So we've been thinking a lot about that as sort of like our path forward when it comes to this AI world. And then how do we help other organizations become stewards of the data they sit on? So like if you're not ready to be a AI forward organization, totally fine. Like I want people to think about how to become AI ready organizations. Like how do you organize yourselves so that when inevitably some version of AI shows up your door, you can actually use it in the way that you understand. It accelerates the work that you want to get done. And it's not just simply doing things willy-nilly across your ecosystem. And so I talk a lot to organizations, and Medic talks a lot to organizations about how to organize your data sets, how to document things correctly, how to just make things more discoverable by these AI systems so that they can help you understand what's truly going on in the world.
I feel like you need a checklist. Do you have that?
I mean, we have some version of an internal one that maybe we should think about releasing.
I'm going to ask you, I think this is something all of our organizations would benefit from, is an AI readiness, because I think many of us are using AI, but it feels like we're trying to play catch up, and we don't know what we don't know.
And similarly to how like us and all our hopefully and organizations that surround Medic are sharing things that work, we also should be sharing all the different prompts that we're using, all the different ways that we're using AI inside our organizations, et cetera. Like, for example, we've built some workflow management stuff inside Mozilla that we should just be telling the rest of the world that, like, the way I manage my calendar today is so fundamentally different than 3 months ago, for example.
I think we all could use help with that.
No, it's actually kind of great. Like, and so like we should all just be sharing those type of things. Like calendaring is just my personal thing because I hate it so much. But like for all the different pain points in our organizations, like how are we using AI to solve that? Like one of these sessions should just be like 5-minute lightning talks of just like all the different things.
I was going to propose like a share day. Yeah, like share. What was it we did as kids? Like
show and tell.
Show and tell. That's what we need. We need like the Alliance show and tell.
But so we've also been going through like large organizational changes in Medic, because not necessarily because of this, but it's hard to say that's not coincident with a lot of this. Like spinning off Medic Afia has been a really interesting exercise for us, because we're now setting up a local organization that's very different than the global organization. And honestly, the big models have been really useful for us to read all the lawyer documents and just understand like how we're actually going to make that work and explain it to the rest of our board in really simple terms that they can understand and get behind, like kind of things. Like we've moved to a co-executive, co-ED model inside of Medic because it just turned out like, especially in this world, this is more than a job that a single person can fit in their head. So we now have two amazing women that sort of like run Medic in a very joint way, but really one of their brains is really focused on technical, product, human centric. The other woman's brain is focused on operations and fundraising. But like these are such two different worlds that having two people focus on it has been really helpful for us. And honestly, it's been a game changer within the organization because like now we can hold multiple things in our heads at the same time. So that's been actually kind of great to watch too.
You might get some questions in the break about that too, because I think that's a really intriguing idea. And I think a lot of us who've led organizations know that's a impossible set of multiple
and we
skills.
were resistant to having a co-ED model for a long time.
What got you there?
It turned out we had two amazing women who'd just been with the organization long enough that they were like the soul of it, that they were able to go do it. Like we thought about doing a search for an co-ED model, was not, we couldn't wrap our heads around pulling that off. Yeah. But for us, it just turned out we had that talent inside. We just were looking in the wrong place.
That's very cool. Okay, I am going to open it up for questions. Raffi, thank you. You've been so generous. We may have some questions online. Hopefully we'll have some questions in the room. Anyone? Yes, I'll start with Josh and then we'll go into the back.
Thanks so much for the great...
Wait, we have a microphone coming to you because we want to make sure the folks online can hear.
Can you hear me?
Yes, and please introduce yourself.
Josh Brass, I'm a physician and a global strategy.
Actually turn the microphone on, sorry. All right, we'll do it one more
How's
time.
that?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm Josh Brass. I'm a physician. I work for Global Strategies. We make clinical decision support applications.
Cool.
And my question is about the local road analogy. My experience is it's 99% local roads out there, but you can get good at solving the local road problem. And how did you decide, okay, we're going to set up shops in different areas versus focus on solving the local road problem that may apply to different settings?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that we're thinking about on Medic Global is the local road problem. Like instead, like reframing how we spend our time to be like, we want to get down as far into the community as possible, but then also acknowledging that we're going to be pulled in 12 different directions once we get to like, instead of being at 10,000 feet, being at 100 feet kind of thing. And so for us, like actually setting up those local organizations that can then better understand the different contexts, the different language needs, the different incentives plans and different incentive structures, I think for us was key. But really, it's also cultivating local talent because like in the end, we want ownership to be there, not just the understanding of the problems. So like actually then being able to reframe part of Medic's job as not just building this technology, but really building the ecosystem that's going to support this technology and potentially bring other technologies to play too. Like, from the global standpoint, like I only see the world through the CHT, our community health toolkit. But like when you're actually on the ground, like, I spent a few weeks in Nairobi. I want to say it was last year, right before all the craziness happened. And I was just like, CHT is not the right answer for this problem. And so like, but we can't see that at the global level. But like, I'm hoping as we actually inspire more of that like developer network, developer community at a local level, they can see those things in a way that we just won't be able to.
I'm going to add a quick recommendation before we go to the next question. One of our members, Nithya Ramanathan of NextLeaf, wrote a really great article with colleagues in the Stanford Social Innovation Review called Scale That Lasts. And it talks about ownership. And I think it was one of the most read articles in SSIR last year, but talking about like it's a 6 or 7 step process around ownership and really well matched with what Raffi's talking about here. Yes.
Nitya has a question. Nitya,
Okay, wait, we'll go to Nitya and then we'll go to the back of the room. Sorry. Yes.
Krista, thank you for that. That was unplanned. Hello, Nithya Ramanathan here. I apologize I couldn't be there in person. I didn't want to pass on this persistent cold to all of you. So really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much. And Raffi, I wanted to actually just take you back to what you were talking about in terms of local community ownership, because it is something that we at NextLeaf think about continuously. It's something that we've heard from ministries from the very beginning, which is they would rather build their own code if it means that they can own it and locally host it and control it. And then with USAID shutting down, of course, that just brought that entire thing, kind of blew it all open, where ministries of health could point to this situation and say, see, this is why we want local control. And one of the things that we find with many peer organizations is there's this sort of approach of, well, we can build it better for you. So, it's better to do SaaS, it's better to do it in the cloud, et cetera. And I see that. But we've actually at NextLeaf decided to go the approach of local hosting and supporting that in order to really honor data ownership, data sovereignty. So my question is, thank you for letting me share that context, but my question is just how are you thinking about, and at Medic and your various hats, how are you thinking about local hosting and honoring kind of country ownership, some of the local legislation when the infrastructure hasn't quite caught up yet? Yeah, would love your thoughts on how you're approaching that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So I write a newsletter that's called Owners Not Renters. And it's like specifically around what you just mentioned, which is like, I truly believe we need to get to a world where like we own our technology and we're not beholden and are renting our technology. Now,
Yeah.
that doesn't necessarily mean local hosting, but that's one way that you could go do it. Because like, if I draw on my time, and I apologize for my politics for a second, if I draw on my time at the DNC, one of the reasons I was brought into the DNC was the Russians hacked the DNC's email system. And the way they were able to do it was locally hosted by the DNC. And the DNC didn't have the talent needed in order to secure it properly. So like literally one of the first things I did was like, hey, Microsoft, I need you to own this problem, not me. But being able to make a call on a case-by-case basis is what it means for me to be an owner. It was just like, I know that like in this particular thing, I don't have the capability to go do it. So I will then outsource that. Like, I'm not going to fix the plumbing in my house. Like, I could do it. I don't think you want me to. But I will just outsource that to someone else. Similarly, like when it comes to like cloud hosting, like you can just need to make a call of just like, do I have the talent? Am I willing to develop the talent? And if not, maybe that's the one thing we're going to figure out how like AWS knows how to secure themselves from a DDoS attack from a foreign actor. Like we're just going to let them go do it for me. So being able to like actually split up a problem into more fine-grained pieces than just my application, I think is what we need to learn to do. And then we can start making calls on a case-by-case basis.
Great. I know we have a question in the back. 2 questions. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Diane Dodge. I'm with the TIBA Foundation. And I just want to give you an example because we work with Medic. You probably haven't even heard about it, but this is what the ecosystem is like. We help facilitate a collaborative of 14 different counties, reproductive health leaders. And we found out, we were talking about the Ichis app that's happening in Kenya. And it's all about cervical cancer, this collaborative in breast cancer. And we asked to have Medic come and show us while they were developing, what questions are you putting there for the health workers? How are you doing it? And they were very interested, showed up, wanted to get feedback on how it's happening. And then the big thing also is helping the users actually use it. And that is part of ownership too. The Ministry of Health is implementing it, but they are talking to partners across the country. How do you help train the community health workers in this? How do you get the feedback back from them to make these changes? So it's happening out there.
No, I really appreciate that. And like, when I visited last, it was also seeing that different counties wanted different dashboards. Like different counties just want different, like the national people want one view, everyone else wants a different view. So like being able to push control down as far as we could is sort of like my goal. And so I'm glad that worked out with the team of just like wanting to actually learn, because we think of it also as it's a socio-technical problem, right? It's not just code. Like it's how is code used? How is code lived with? Is sort of like the questions that we have to grapple with.
Yeah, thank you.
I think there's another question back there too.
Hi, thanks so much. Natalie Myers with Resurge International. We're a global surgery nonprofit organization helping to build capacity and education around the surgical space. So thank you so much for your talk. I actually have a bit of an existential question for you, given all of your expertise and all of your experience. But I'm just wondering, we hear so much in global health and international development of all the potential for leapfrogging with technologies. So I would love to hear from you if you could predict for us, what will we have done right in the West if we do end up actually using these technologies to leapfrog, and what will we have done wrong if we see that equity gap actually expand because of AI?
I mean, the wrong, I think you have your finger exactly on what we would have done wrong, is like that equity gap would have expanded. Like, I think that like, if we're solely I think the way that these systems are usually thought about in the world is that they will enable those who are already well off to get even further well off in the grand scheme of things. Like, they usually have more access. It's usually their data that's been trained in the systems. Like, there was sadly a lot of evidence, even just last year, that a lot of these systems weren't trained on women's health. They're only trained on men's health, like that kind of stuff. And so like, we could potentially see more of that. For my mind, like, I mean, I want to live in a Star Trek like universe where everything is great. And like, I think the way that we sort of get there is like, we need to have better ownership across the board on how these technologies are used and owned and deployed and developed, so we can make sure that individuals' voices are actually showing up in all the different places. So for me, success really looks like, if you were to graph the intervention across the entire socioeconomic, entire race-based, entire gender-based spectrum, that's like a uniform lift. I worry that we're really not going in that direction right now, like really not going in that direction. Like, we're really going into a world of like benefiting the few at the cost of the others. And so like that's the metric I want to look for. It's like how getting to that point. And I think it comes down to like education on all of us on how to use these systems. We need more people developing these systems. Right now, the way these systems are developed is it takes tens of billions of dollars in order to pull it off. Like, you just saw how much money Sam Altman, Dario, et cetera, are raising out there in the world, but it doesn't have to be that way. Like, I think like for me, my wife's a computer scientist, so I can rag on computer scientists all day long. Like, I think a lot of it is that like, we haven't set up incentive structures for academics to take risks and to explore the space better. And so like, we need to figure out who are the true risk takers, who could be the true risk takers, and let them explore that space to understand what the real opportunities are. We might be in, what I call like a local maxima of just like, we found a solution that kind of works, so we're just going to run with it. But that doesn't mean we found the right solution to pull it all off. I don't know if I answered your question and just ranted, but I think about the same things.
Lots to think about. Other questions? Yes.
So I can't help myself. You asked the question but didn't answer it. Are we screwed?
I'm actually a very optimistic person. And so like, actually my podcast, every middle-aged white dude has a podcast. My podcast was called Technically Optimistic, because I actually really believe having conversations like this end up to move the world in a better direction. So like, one of the things I found when doing my podcast is that when I spoke to, let's call it lay people, everyday people around this technology, they usually end up being like, I never thought about that way. We have to do something. Like, so I think it all actually starts with conversations and education. So if we're all more aware, then, when a big platform company asks to deploy their technology inside your organization, you can have a conversation to push back, because you realize that power is on your side. When your children want to go and work on these type of technologies, we can direct them in the right ways that they should go do it. When we're raising our society, we can make those choices. So I'm actually an optimistic person, but I think it doesn't come for free. Like, I think if we all just sit around and do nothing and assume that it's all inevitable, then it will be inevitable. Like, it'll just be like, survivor's bias effectively. And so we actually have to do something, but it starts with these type of conversations.
Which is why we're having this here today. You have a question?
Hi, everyone, and thanks for this talk. It's so interesting. I'm Navita Jain. I work at AVAC, and I'm the partnership team lead at the organization. And AVAC really focuses on advocacy, particularly around equitable access to new technologies for HIV prevention, but also really supporting advocacy networks and community civil society organizations to be partners in all the work that we're doing for HIV prevention. And that kind of leads into my question of, we talk about making sure that we have community and local leadership, but oftentimes when engaging with ministries of health or community health workers, it doesn't include advocates or civil society organizations, which often are bringing, community-led and community-monitored data that is really highlighting the gaps that we see in really getting to real equitable access and engagement with key populations. Our systems are often built that don't really support that. My question to you is, how do we expand that definition of local leadership to make sure those communities are also included? And it's not just ministries of health or healthcare workers, and we're really ensuring that some of the biggest gaps, especially with the funding cuts recently, are actually ensuring access to key population groups and other groups that are very quickly being left behind.
It's a great question. In a previous administration, when I used to speak to Congress about this, I would say things like, the only way a system like this works is a three-legged stool. Like, you need government, you need commercial entities, and you need civil society, and they need to be kind of counterbalanced with each other. We are very much not in that world right now. Like, I acknowledge that we're very much in the companies and everyone else kind of situation. So we do need to figure that out. And I think a lot of it just comes down to figuring out, not just that makes it sound like it's super easy to do, but figuring out what are the right forums to have these conversations. Because again, in my optimistic view of the world, I actually think people want to hear these other voices. It's like when they're left to their own echo chambers, they just do whatever they want to go do. But I actually do believe that a lot of these people want to hear what an alternative way is, what other voices really are, because we need those voices to be part of how that system is developed. So I would love to see more forums. I would love to see more meeting and convening points. I'd love to see more just conversations. There was just a conversation in San Francisco, I want to say last week, on the future of work, which was just that intersection of technology, government, policy folks, and community, all just talking about the issues. And the number of Substacks I saw come out of that conference was great. That's a measure of that conversation may have started something, but they won't finish it. They'll start it. And so I think we need to find more of these convening points, and we have to figure out a way to do it in a grassroots way, because no one's going to come and save us. We save ourselves in this moment. And so we need to figure that out.
I'm going to actually end with a few last questions for you in two different directions. And I love that you highlighted technically optimistic, your podcast, because that is kind of where I want to end. With the folks who feel like AI and technology is moving really fast and it's hard to keep up, what advice do you have? I'll say for all of us, because I think we all feel that many times. Yeah. What should we be doing for the next step to be prepared, to be educated, to be engaged in these conversations?
Yeah. I mean, I actually really like your idea of show and tell, but I really think it starts with just being curious.
Yeah.
I think that you can't just ostrich your point. Is ostrich the one that puts their head in there? You can't just ostrich yourself at this moment. Things are moving too fast.
Yeah.
And so I feel that people who have, you can tell who are the people who have tinkered with it and the people who haven't. Okay. And I think that you have to at least be tinkering with it. And I actually find no problem with going and tinkering with a ChatGPT or a Claude, et cetera. Just understand what you're getting into. Maybe read one or two of my pieces before you go do it, just to put yourself in the right frame of mind. But you have to be better educated on what is actually capable of. I'm preparing for a Mozilla board meeting in 2 weeks, where I plan to semi-blow the board's mind away of just I don't think I've touched a browser in 2 weeks. And so just being able to explain to them that the world is really changing, but you just gotta I'm hoping that isn't a cause of them to be oh, I need to really think about this, and I'll play with it for a while and see what the hubbub is about. So I think it starts there of just you just gotta tinker with it, and then talk to your kids, see how they're cheating on their tests. Talk to your friend down the street and how they're organizing something, and just see what those are. I think we just have to have a conversation. That's where I'd start.
That's great advice, by the way, is asking your kids how they're using AI. And for those of you who are teaching like me, how our students are using it. Because in some ways great, in other ways quite concerning.
I'll just one quick anecdote of this.
Yeah.
So again, my wife, amazing woman, way smarter than I am. She is one of the foremost reinforcement learners in the world, is a subset of AI. And she teaches what's currently the second largest class at Stanford, because everyone wants to learn AI. And the way grading now, what she's done for grading, which I found super interesting, is homeworks are basically graded at 0%. So she'll give you homework, but she just assumes you're going to run it through ChatGPT and you're going to cheat. So 0% on homework. Midterm and final are proctored exams, closed book. And then you have to show up once a week to a recitation, 3-on-1, 3 students to 1 TA, and do whiteboard problems. And so it's 15 minutes. Like it doesn't matter how well or badly you can't flunk it, but it's mostly attendance based. So like just show up and start doing whiteboard problems on a whiteboard with 2 other students to demonstrate you understand the stuff. So that's how higher education is reacting to it because of it.
Yeah. I also want to pick up your point about being curious, because I think one of the things I love about our community with the Alliance is how curious all of you are too. So I feel like we're already like doing the right thing, which I'm happy to say. And I think the last question for you too is like, what are you really optimistic about in global health and the use of AI or other technologies?
I actually do think that this is a path, if done correctly, for us to still have the kind of impact we want on potentially less dollars. So like, I think that like this actually is a way for us to like augment the work that we're doing, not replace it. Because I think that ends up in that like replacing it is a short-term win that's going to cause us long-term pain. But augmenting us might be short-term slower for long-term betterment. So I really am optimistic that like if we can figure out how to do it right, if we can really understand what ownership means, if we can get local communities involved, so it's not just 7 CEOs in San Francisco dictating how this all works, I actually do think we'll get into a better place because of it.
That's great. And the last thing I'll just end with by saying is we were just chatting briefly earlier about Pope Leo's new encyclical. I'm not going to ask you to explain it, but what I do want to just point out is that many of his arguments about putting power back in the hands of people, I wonder if he's read your stuff, because I would just want to thank you both for coming to speak with us today, but also for the writing and the conversation starting that you are doing. It's so valuable to the community. So thank you. A very warm welcome. Thank you.